Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, a dedicated hosting provider discovers a backdoor in their infrastructure. The catch? Our very own Allan uses them. We've got the details. Plus, picking the right back-end storage for your virtual machine, a big batch of your questions, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 113 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on June 6, 2013. This episode's brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible Scale Engine. Go over to ScaleEngine.com and see what they're all about. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Mr. Allan Jude. Hey there, Allan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Episode 113 in a row, too, which is kind of ridiculous. It's now we're just showing off, Allan, at this point. Mm-hmm. We have a ridiculously big show. I know I kind of say that a lot, but this week, the roundup is huge, the feedback is huge, and there's some very interesting news stories, including, it sounds like, Allan, you're going to give us a deep dive inside malware, right?
One specific bit of it, yes.
Well, I try to make it sound all like amazing and awesome. And you're like,
yes,
well,
and I prefer not to,
I'm trying to get people riled up and excited to watch our 113th episode. Did I mention it was in a row? All right, Allan. So where do we start on this first story?
So a security researcher named Sherry Davidoff basically was hired to do an investigation into two companies that had their bank accounts drained or attempted to be drained. And so in investigating, she found that both of them had gotten the black hole exploit kit, which is one we've talked about extensively on the show. So she kind of walks through the steps of how the malware gets on the computer and then what it does once it's on there. And I thought that was useful.
So this is sort of like one of those, read through this to kind of get a real-world example of how people have gotten in so you can kind of protect yourself by reversing the methodology in a sense.
Kind of, yeah. So basically in both cases, it started with a simple phishing email. The first one was just like, hi, as promised, your photos. And it had a link, right?
Yeah.
It's like short enough that you don't catch the bad grammar, right? It's the kind of email you expect to receive from someone who sends it from their iPhone or something.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And so in this case, the secretary at the company clicked the link and nothing happened. So she closed the browser and went back to her day and just, forgot about it, right? But the unsuspecting user follows the link. Nothing seems to happen. But what actually happened is their computer is now infected with the black hole exploit kit. In a different case, it was an email claiming to be from a bank saying that your ability to do the online money transfers has been suspended. Click here to resolve it.
Dear account operator, your ACH transfers have been temporarily disabled, says the message. Mm-hmm. So she clicked on the link to see what was up.
Yes, and nothing really came up. And she's like, whatever. And again, went back about their day.
Oh, it must be a bad link. And then she just figures, whatever, okay.
Yeah, and people forget about it, right? You get a lot of email. Anyway, a few days later, while visiting the website of their bank, the user is prompted by a page to verify their identity. Right? And over a short period of time, the attacker, using a man-in-the-browser attack, right, because they now own your machine, and so they have your browser modify what the page is actually saying, right? So you're going to the Bank of America website, but what you're seeing is the attacker's version of the Bank of America website.
Right.
And they make it, ask for your name, phone number, answers to your security questions, the value of your RSA token, the one that changes all the time. So it even gets past two-factor authentication. In this case, the attacker used the information then to wire themselves just shy of $50,000 out of the victim company's bank account. However, because it's a large corporate account, the bank requires a second person to authorize such a transfer. Right? So then when the attacker ran into this, what they did is use the man-in-the-browser attack to ask the victim for the name of that second person.
Clever.
And then so that person entered it. And then the attacker asked for the email address of that second person so they could send them a phishing email, infect them, and so on and so on. However, the user got suspicious, called the bank, and the bank's like, "No, we would never ask for that," and froze the account and so on.
That's nice that the bank seemed to jump on it pretty quick.
Well, see, if the money actually gets stolen, then it's the bank that's liable to replace the funds.
Right. Yeah, it's in their best interest.
Yeah, the bank. That's the only time your bank's going to jump to do something for you. When if they don't jump, they're going to have to pay for it.
It's very true.
If it's going to cost you, then they're like, all right, second Tuesday of next week, we'll get right on that.
Yeah.
But anyway, once the black hole exploit kit is installed on a computer, it basically downloads updates for itself to use newer exploits in case your machine is patched and so on. And then it continues to phone home about once every 20 minutes using an HTTP post. So the attacker basically gets this continuous list of who's still alive and so on, and can use those to basically return even more updates.
So isn't this interesting? We keep seeing this malware now that is self-updating, and it's calling home and it's checking to get new intelligence to avoid detection and to fix bugs and things like that. I mean, this is like a whole new level of trickiness that this malware can get, because once it gets in there, it can stay much more effectively.
Right. Well, because this black hole exploit kit is basically commercial malware, right? Some company or person builds this and then sells it to people. And part of its value is the fact that it keeps getting updates and can be customized and so on.
Right.
So the researcher also managed to capture one of these man-in-the-browser attacks on video, right? So they purposely infected a virtual machine and then went through the process. And they have a video of it there. But basically, when they went to the Bank of America website, the infected computer basically injected a page after the user submits the login form, right? So you're at the front page of the bank, you enter your username and password, and you hit login. And instead of being taken to the page that you would normally be taken to, before that page comes up, you're sent to this other page. And this injected page, claiming to be from the bank, and it's on the bank's website and has their theme, so you can't tell that anything's wrong other than the fact that your bank normally wouldn't do this, right? And basically, the fairly well social engineered page said that the bank does not recognize your computer, right? It's like, we don't remember you logging in from this computer before.
This is part of our security process.
Yes. So we would like to know a bunch of things about you, like what's your debit card number and your social security number and your date of birth and your mother's maiden name and a bunch of things. And when you enter all of those, instead of them being sent to the bank, they're sent to the attacker.
Right.
And then you're redirected to the bank's regular page, right? So you get logged in and you go to the bank as normal.
So then you never have any reason to suspect anything because your transaction proceeded as expected.
Yeah. And so the way the researcher did this was by entering an invalid username. And if you're on the real site, you get an error saying, hey, there's no such user.
Right, of course.
But when you enter the infected machine, it asks you for all that information and then redirects you to the page. It says, hey, there's no such user. Now, the other thing we've heard about with these man-in-the-browser attacks, not the black hole exploit, but the Zeus one, is they will also modify your account balance page to not show so that you don't see the missing funds, right? So that, that line where it says, oh, we stole $49,500 from you, that line will be missing. And the balance will be rectified. So even your transactions that come after, they'll show what your balance would have been if they hadn't stole your money. So again, you have no way of finding out. And this is kind of an issue with, a lot of banks now are switching to e-statements, right? Where you view your statement on your bank's website instead of getting it in the mail.
Right.
But if you have a virus and the version you're looking at is being modified, and your bank only gives you 30 or 60 days to report an issue like that, that amount of time could end up passing before you find out that you don't actually have as much money in your account as your computer is saying you do.
Well, the other thing I hate to be the guy that hates all the new stuff, but the other thing I don't like about the online statements is that a lot of times they send you an email to notify you about the statement. Hey, by the way, you've got a new statement, go check it out. And that just keeps training the users, oh, my bank's emailing me important information with links that I should click on a regular basis. And it trains a bad habit that then people can phish.
Yes, because when my power company and gas company do that, they specifically don't have links and say, go to our website and log in.
Yeah.
Right? We're not providing you a link specifically for that reason, but users don't know that they should look for that.
Right.
Right. And yeah, basically, you should rarely ever click links in emails. You should go to the website yourself and log in manually or whatever.
Yeah. And what's the other thing that reminds me, the other thing that makes this possible, of course, is they just have to target certain big banks that have potentially, I don't know, millions of customers. I don't know. Like, I mean, in this example, it's Bank of America,
which is huge, right?
Ginormous. Yeah. Yeah. So.
But yeah, in the more sophisticated versions of this attack, the attacker is actually communicating with your system in real time, right? In order to take advantage of information as you enter it, right? So, you log into you're on your computer and you go to your bank's website, and the hacker who's monitoring your computer, it gets a ding or whatever, and they jump on and they're like, all right, so after you log into your bank, I'm going to use that login in order to, authorize a transfer. And it wants the answer to a secret question. All right, I'm going to inject a page, so the next time you click something at your bank's website, it's going to ask you for the answer. It's like, here's the question that I just got asked. What's the answer?
Right.
And the user enters it, and then I enter it, and now I authorize that transfer.
Right.
Or, I can ask you for the RSA token number. Or even if it's like a smart card, I can do it while you have the smart card inserted. Right? Because I'm actually using your computer, not my computer, to access the bank account.
Right.
And so it can access that smart card and, make it work. And that's why a lot of these banking malware are targeting businesses rather than people, because businesses have bank accounts full of money that people generally don't. Now, businesses are more protected by having things like RSA tokens and smart cards, but these man-in-the-browser attacks work around that by being in real time so they can make use of that RSA token for the 10 seconds it's good for.
Yeah. Wow. Man, I'm glad I don't work in the banking industry anymore. And I was in the security area too. Could you imagine? Oh.
Well, but again, the thing a lot of people didn't understand about this is that it's not that the hackers took over the Bank of America site and modified it.
Right.
It's just on your computer.
Right.
So it's not really the bank's fault.
No, but they still get involved. They still get wrapped up in it all. It's just a nasty thing. And then, of course...
And they have to try to come up with security systems that defeat this. But, when you're not on a trusted computer, it's pretty hard.
Well, that's my question is, like, what responsibilities do the banks have in all of this to prevent this from happening? And are you going to see a situation where, we've done stories on this show where Microsoft actually works with law enforcement and assembles an almost like SWAT team that goes into data centers and confiscates hardware for evidence? Are you going to see banks assemble teams like this, just like Microsoft has, to combat this kind of stuff?
My bigger worry is that you're going to see something like, you have to run this virus scanner that we pay for on your system in order to log into the bank. Right? So the bank's going to have some requirement that use Internet Explorer and McAfee antivirus in order to log into your bank account.
You have to use our partner anti-malware solution that's been certified by Bank of America to keep you safe.
Yeah. Otherwise, you can't bank online or something.
And then us Linux users and FreeBSD users. Yeah.
Exactly.
Womp womp.
And it just, I really don't want to see anything like that happen. So.
Yeah. And it just...
Riley, that's why it was a worst case example, because it is the worst idea ever.
Yeah, it is the worst idea
ever. That's my point, but... yes, he's like, yeah, that was the worst idea ever. It's like, yes, that was my point.
Yeah. I don't know, Alan. It's an interesting thing to watch because as the incentive is there, and, as we move into a world filled with digital currencies, you're going to see this client-side malware. I mean, there's going to be so much more incentive to make that stuff really clever when people have wallets on their computer filled with cryptocurrency coins. It's going to be one of these things where this stuff is hard because you can only target so many banks. But when you can just start targeting like everybody that's running a certain version of a client software for an e-currency, that's going to be huge.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, why don't we take a pause right here and thank this week's sponsor, GoDaddy.com. GoDaddy.com is a longtime sponsor of the TechSNAP program, and I thought I would share a new perspective for you. One of the things that I've appreciated as a consultant, when I go into businesses, I don't know if like a lot of my clients just were some of the early adopters and they bought domain names forever ago from these hole-in-the-wall domain name registrars, but it is always a nightmare when you roll in there and they've lost the contact information, that person's long quit. This this is one of the first things you have to tackle, especially when you have a renewal coming up, or you want to maybe set up a new mail server and you need to modify their MX records. You got to get this solved, and that's where GoDaddy.com comes in. A lot of times I'll go in there and I'll get everybody moved over, and we have that 249 code still. So if you use Tech 249, that works on transfers, I believe, and you plug that in there, you transfer the domains over, you get them all under one account where everybody can manage it, and then when you're done, when your business is done there, you can just walk away. They remove you from their folder, and they have full access, and they transfer to the next person. And the flip side's been very true too. When I've walked into a business and I've gone in there and they already have GoDaddy, it's always a sigh of relief because I know that that's already taken care of for me. So it's excellent all around because GoDaddy, being the number one domain name registrar, makes them the gold standard. So go over to GoDaddy.com and use our code TECH249 when you're buying yourself a .com from my gal Danica with her signature right there. That way you know it's really her. Because if she didn't have that there, you might think it was somebody else. And we've also got a code that'll take 35% off a new order. For example, if you're going into a small business, a client of yours, maybe you've just started somewhere and you're doing their IT, and they don't have an account yet over at GoDaddy, or it's your first time buying from GoDaddy, use the code 35OFF3. 35 off 3 takes 35% off your entire order. So move everything in there, get it all consolidated, and save 35% at the same time. That's an outrageously good deal. So thank you to GoDaddy.com for enabling my small business, and thank you to GoDaddy for hooking up the listeners and viewers of the TechSNAP program with some great deals, and thanks to you guys for using those codes to let GoDaddy know you appreciate them supporting the TechSNAP program. Thanks, GoDaddy. All right, Allan, why don't we move on to the next story? And I guess it came in from Anonymous on an email, or did he actually sign it down here? Oh, he did.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
This
is an email I got from the company.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Because I'm a customer.
I gotcha.
Yes.
All right. So where do we begin?
All right. So the dedicated server provider in Germany called Hetzner.
Okay.
Which is fairly popular because it's rather inexpensive.
Okay.
And they give you like 10 terabytes of bandwidth with each server and so on.
I'm in.
So they found the administrators found a backdoor on their Nagios monitoring server. And then when they investigated further, they discovered that it was also been infected the web interface that they use for managing dedicated servers, which they called a Hetzner robot, which is some custom software they have. But basically, because the monitoring server and the management server were compromised, it means that the hackers probably had access to your personal information, which includes your name, email address, phone number, your hash password, the last 3 digits of your credit card number, the type of your credit card, like Visa, MasterCard, whatever, and the expiration date. And any other information you might have entered into the robot panel. The actual credit card number is never actually stored by Hetzner. It's passed directly to the payment provider, who gives Hetzner a unique token to be able to refer to that card in the future. So that way Hetzner never actually has the card number, and so they can't, even if they get hacked, they can't disclose it. So that was helpful there. However, if you're a European customer and use direct debit or a debit note where they take the money directly out of your bank account, those credentials were encrypted in the Hetzner database. However, because they compromised the server, they may have gotten the key to decrypt it as well. Which is the problem with storing things encrypted in the database, is you also need the key somewhere. And, if it's on the same server that got compromised, then it's not providing, maybe the hacker didn't find it in time or something, but then again, maybe they did.
Wow, these guys offer everything you would ever want. I mean, this is incredible, the different range of products they offer. It's unbelievable.
They also have an interesting reverse auction for their used servers.
Really?
So basically, once somebody's had a server for a while and they return it, like they have a bunch of old AMD dual core processors. Instead of just adding those back to their inventory and try to sell them, they have these auctions where they start at a high price and the price keeps going down until somebody buys it. So if you only need a gig or 2 of RAM on a dedicated server, you can get them really cheap there.
So this robot is some custom...
It's a management interface.
Was designed to allow you an easy-to-use interface for managing your server, as well as domain names and name server entries. Thus it combines all the tasks. Picture of it, but. It combines all the tasks in a single surface. That's kind of reading the translation.
So when I log into the robot, I see my 4 servers, and there's a tab that shows each of their IP addresses, and I can monitor the bandwidth by IP address.
Do VNC.
Yeah, there's a tab. They have a rescue system. So I say, I need the rescue system. Please boot this over the network into a FreeBSD rescue system. and then it basically gives me a temporary root password. I SSH to my server's IP, log in as root with that password, and I'm now in a networked booted version of FreeBSD where I can fix my system and then reboot it.
Huh.
I used this on Monday to reformat a server to have ZFS as the root file system and upgrade to the latest FreeBSD on a server.
Well, that's cool.
And they have, you control your reverse DNS. Everything you need for managing your server is in this control panel. It's actually a very nice control panel.
But it has a backdoor.
Oh, well, no. We'll get to where the backdoor was in a second.
Oh, okay.
And the passwords they say they were SHA-256 hashed and they had a salt, but it doesn't sound like they're actually using like SHA-256 crypt. So it's not as good as if they'd actually used like the standard. But the robot is old enough, the standard probably didn't exist yet. Mm-hmm. So it's better. At least they're not just SHA-256 with no salt, but it probably could have been better. So the quote they have here is, the malicious code used in the backdoor exclusively infects the RAM. First analysis suggested that the malicious code directly infiltrates running Apache and SSHD processes. The infection neither modifies the binaries of the services that were compromised, nor does it restart the service that's been affected. So it sounds kind of like the CDORT thing, except for the CDORT one modified the binary on the file system. And this, possibly a newer version of CDORT or something entirely different, doesn't seem to modify the files on the disk. So it's like a runtime process infection. So this is either, a more advanced version of CDORT or an entirely new exploit.
Yeah.
Although they still don't know how they actually compromise machines to install this stuff. But again, that's the same problem we've been seeing with all of the CDORT stuff, is nobody knows how they're getting on the machines in the first place to infect the Apache and the SSHD.
Well, this is quite an email they sent you, Allan.
Yes.
I mean, they really went into details in that one email.
Right. Well, this is, as a customer, this is the kind of email I expect to get.
You'd want, also, right?
They're a technical company, right? So they have technical type people, and they're German. So
is that good? That's good, right?
Yes. So they're very efficient, and yes, they
Yeah. It's not racist if it's a compliment.
Right.
Huh. So, are you at risk?
Well, our credit card wasn't stolen.
Okay.
So that's all that really matters, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose so. Well, awesome.
Yep.
So we have links to all of that in the show notes, as well as that very, it looks like they just put a ton of this stuff, like they're running just all of this out of a wiki, which is kind of an interesting approach too. Even their security announcements are in a wiki page. I'm sure they don't allow public editing, but it's kind of an interesting.
Right. Well, it's just, I think part of it is because they do in multiple languages, and it's just easier that way. Right? Because most of their stuff technically is always in German and then in English.
Right.
Like most of the times the emails I get, all the automated ones and so on, will be like German, it's like English at the bottom. And then there's German, and then English.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hitting the Google Translate a few times. All right. Well, before we move on to the feedback segment, I just want to remind folks that as Father's Day approaches, I'm just reminding you, one part public service announcement. Father's Day is Sunday the 16th. And when you're shopping for Father's Day, please consider using our affiliate links at the bottom of the Jupiter Broadcasting websites. We have links down there for Amazon, for eBay, Netflix. If you want to get Dad Netflix for Father, that's actually, with the rest of the development on there, that's probably a good time. Newegg, if you want to get him some hardware. ThinkGeek, if you want to get something funny. Best Buy. Audible would be a great choice. And we also have our Chrome and Firefox extension. You install those, and then it'll automatically tag your shopping session at all of those sites and even more. And then it contributes a portion of your shopping session to the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. That way, when you're getting yourself something, you give Jupiter Broadcasting a little something, and that helps us pay the bills and keeps us on the air. Mm-hmm. All right, before we move on to the feedback, was there anything else?
Nope.
All right, then.
I'm just...
chatting with the chat room?
No. It reminded me of a talk from BSDCan that would be good to have a link to, which was the one about runtime process infection. How to infect a binary while it's running. Speaking
of BSDCan and talks, we're going to talk about some of those in the feedback, aren't we?
Yes. The videos for some of the talks are online, not all of them yet, although the rest should appear in the next couple of days, I'm hoping.
Very good.
And so I highlighted a couple including one that I didn't get to see but wanted to.
All right. Well, we'll cover those in the feedback and a lot more. So I guess with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Allan, our first email comes from Jordan this week. Buckle up. We're going to jump right in. Jordan says, I'm currently using a Linksys router with DDWRT and MAC filtering for wireless security. I want to add an access point using another DDWRT router. Is there a way I can have it authenticate through the MAC filter on the main router for wireless protection for the wireless portion of my network? Or do I need to look into something like pfSense? All right. So this question... So what he's essentially asking, I think, is can he extend his network and use MAC filtering for the wireless security? And I wanted to zoom out with you, Allan. Do you have any opinion on using MAC filtering for your wireless security?
I don't believe in it. It's not... Anybody can spoof the MAC address of their device.
Yeah, the problem is the radio is broadcast, and so you can listen and you can see what MAC addresses are broadcasting things, and then it doesn't really take that much of a genius to emulate a MAC address and then join your wireless network.
Yep.
So I would like to say, Jordan, you need to reconsider that point, but otherwise... You can do it, and I have done it with DDWRT. Oh, I'm gonna get some hate for this. I shouldn't say this, but I'll tell you the easiest solution I've ever found to extending a wireless network in a home. And it's as easier if you already have a Mac in your house or something like that. But the Apple AirPorts Extremes, man, you can just take one and you take the other one, and you can get the cheap little one that plugs into the wall for like $99. And it will automatically detect the other wireless base station, and it will extend the wireless networks. It'll also allow wireless network extending over Ethernet. So if you have one plugged in over Ethernet in one area of your house and one plugged in over Ethernet in the other area of your house, and then they'll see each other over the network, and then they will link up. It is super simple. I realize it's not very geeky, and it's a Mac product, but I'm just putting that out there. I have also done it in DDWRT, but I just didn't find it to be as reliable. This was about 3 years ago, though.
All right.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it depends where the MAC filtering is actually happening. If the MAC filtering happens over the Ethernet part as well, then the first router would see the MAC of the second device. But yeah, if you have two and you have the MAC filter set up on both, it should work. But MAC filtering is not security, so I don't know if it's worth bothering with.
Yeah, I would say he's putting the cart before the horse. All right, but okay. But good question, Jordan, nonetheless, because it let us talk about that particular aspect. So thank you for sending that in. And if you want to follow up, be my guest. I would love to hear more. James writes in with a great question. He says, hey, guys, thanks for the show. I listen to it driving to and home from work every week, and it always makes my drive seem shorter than it really is. Honestly, James, that's a huge reason why I started this network, because I was a commuter, and I wanted more good podcasts to listen to. So... That's awesome. Glad to hear that. That's why we release as audio, and we always will. He says, my question regards using FreeNAS as a storage for virtual machines. You mentioned that you do this from time to time, but you never got into the details of it. Do you use iSCSI or NFS or what? A more in-depth explanation of how your setup is would be most appreciated. Thanks. Keep up the good work. James in Sweden.
Part of it relies on what type of virtual machines you're doing and how often you're building them and stuff.
And what the virtualizer is, if it's VMware ESX or, yeah.
Exactly. But yes, iSCSI and NFS are both options.
Yeah.
A lot of people use NFS just because it's easier and faster to set up, and because provisioning a new one doesn't require you to create a new block device, right? If it's just NFS, it's just, you tell your virtualizer, hey, make a new file in this directory, and boom, you have a virtual machine. Whereas if you want to use iSCSI, you would have to log into the FreeNAS control panel and create a new disk, right? And say, I want it to be this big, and go. But other than that,
yeah, and the other thing too,
iSCSI or NAS or NFS.
For me personally, I do NFS, and I would not go to a client and implement NFS at a client. In fact, I have a client that's using NFS for several virtual machines, and it is consistently a bottleneck. And on the CentOS server specifically, every now and then NFSD actually hangs, and that is a horrible nightmare. So I'm not recommending it for a business, but at home,
their NFS server is CentOS.
Yeah.
Well, there's the problem.
I mean,
FreeBSD. NFS, that works.
So in FreeNAS, so here at home, I have a FreeNAS server, and I use NFS. And first of all, for my performance needs, and I have a great network, everything performs really well. I don't really have any issue there, especially for the load that I'm putting on it. But the other reason I like to use NFS in the home environment is because then I can browse that NFS mount from another machine in my house, and I can manage the virtual machine files just like files on a file system. So if I want to make copies of them, it's just, I can just do it. And when you get into iSCSI, it's a little more complicated and it's not nearly as straightforward. So for me, the performance trade-off is pretty minimal and the convenience factor is pretty maximal. So I like it a lot.
And it depends on some tuning what the performance impact is actually going to be.
Yeah, that made a big difference actually. Just in the CentOS server was just tuning NFS, and I don't remember the details of what we did, but we essentially followed a how-to online that seems to have helped.
Well, specifically like with the FreeBSD one, you might tune the number of worker threads,
right?
Because if you have 20 virtual machines running off the thing and it's only got 6 worker threads, then it's not keeping up. And normally you probably do somewhere between 1 and 1.5 threads per CPU or per CPU thread. So, if you have a hyper-threaded machine that in total looks like it has 24 logical cores, then you'd probably set it for 24 or 32 worker threads. And that way, although going too high might be detrimental to your disks. It depends on what your backing file system is. Right, if it's ZFS, it's going to handle a lot of reading from different places a little better than a regular file system.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and the other nice thing about using NFS is that I just feel like it gives me a little more flexibility. Like in a real pinch, if I had to, and I need to even have a Windows box access it, I could use Unix services for Windows. I guess in theory, and mount that NFS share even via Windows.
And run it in VirtualBox on that Windows machine.
Yeah, so there's for me, there's a huge benefit now. But when it comes down to raw performance and reliability, I kind of give the edge to iSCSI. First of all, iSCSI has a performance benefit, especially if you have your iSCSI interfaces on their own dedicated switch, so they're on their own network.
So there's no extra chatter going on, yes.
Yeah.
And there are iSCSI initiators for Windows, so it means you could mount the virtual disk on a workstation, right? So if you have like a virtual Windows machine or a virtual Windows server even, right, and something goes wrong with it, you can mount that disk as an extra disk on your Windows workstation and work on it, and then unmount it and boot the virtual machine again.
So the downside to that is if the disk on the FreeNAS box is in ZFS, then Windows isn't going to be able to read that. But if it's NFS, the NFS server obfuscates that.
If it's iSCSI, you're going to basically, on top of ZFS, you're going to create a block device, mount that on the Windows machine, and format it NTFS.
Yeah, you can format NTFS. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I just meant like if you already had an existing device, NFS kind of removes the file system layer from it. But it shows you there's a lot of options here, and it just depends on what your use is. I don't remember. He didn't say in his email if he'd be using it at work or home, but I assume home.
Right. NFS works great, but it doesn't scale so well.
If you were going to do like virtual machines and you did like a lot of streaming in your house, maybe to your TV, would you do a separate network card for the NFS stuff?
If your network is switched, then it's not going to matter so much. Only the broadcasts are going to get through. Although if you have a lot of chatty Windows boxes broadcasting all the time, maybe that would be enough to do it.
Yeah.
But you could just separate a VLAN. You don't actually have to have a separate.
Or you could go crazy and just do a crossover. Right? Like if the two machines are next to each other, you have a crossover from the FreeNAS box to the virtual host. That'd be cool. All right. Well, we got a thread.
Although, one of the ideas with having a FreeNAS box with your NFS is you can have 2 separate virtual hosts. Have them, you can slide virtual machines back and forth.
Move it around.
Because the storage is centralized on the FreeNAS.
Yeah, that's another nice thing.
There are a lot of people using FreeNAS as the backend for virtual machines.
Well, I mean, it gives you a ZFS appliance. It's essentially,
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move to backups. We got a thread in the subreddit from Miss SpaceX, and MS SpaceX, Miss SpaceX writes, many times on the show, various backup solutions have been mentioned, but I haven't yet heard our snapshot referenced. I have used it before, and I'm about to set it up again as an easy way to back up multiple machines and multiple file locations, and even run scripts and archive the output. All of this is configurable at time intervals, and retainment time is configurable. Any thoughts on our snapshot? Have you used it, Allan?
No. The main problem with anything based on rsync is that what if it's a file that's never in a consistent state, right? If it's a file that's being like a database, right? The back end for like a MySQL database or something, it's being written to constantly. So you can never, it's, unless you have real snapshotting from UFS or ZFS or something, then you never get a version of it where you read the entire file without the file changing, right? rsync doesn't really have a way to detect when the file has changed while it was being read. And so that means your backup could end up being corrupt. And, people talked about, if I do ZFS and do this and this, then it's a backup. It's like, yeah, but a real backup solution is better.
It's not a backup unless you have multiple copies of it. If it's your only other copy.
Yes, and so they were talking, that was my first point. It's like rsync is not a backup because you don't have a version history, basically.
Exactly.
Now, there's a way to do that with rsync, but the problem still becomes the fact that without real snapshots, you're not actually getting a consistent version of the files. Right? Because not only do you need to copy the entire MySQL database file without it being modified while you're reading it, technically you need to get every single file on the system from the exact same second. Right? And the only real way to do that is with a snapshot.
So it looks like
even if you're using something like Bacula, you have to use the Bacula client's ability to run commands before and after to take a snapshot, back up the snapshot, and then you can remove the snapshot if you don't need it.
I'm wondering if that's what our snapshot does. This is using rsync and hard links. It's possible to keep multiple files, full backups, and make them instantly available.
This is just keeping the multiple versions. Basically,
so it's sort of sitting on top of rsync and managing that.
Basically, what it does is it makes the first time it backs up everything. The second time it backs up everything, but if the file hasn't changed since the last backup, it does a hard link instead. So it's basically just deduplicating, having a separate rsync every day.
Kind of like Backup PC does. Have you used Backup PC?
No.
It's Backup PC. It uses rsync, and it's got a nice web interface, and it connects over Samba, NFS, or Apple File Print. And it'll even it'll use DHCP somehow to discover all of the machines on your network and kind of auto-add them. And then it goes in with rsync, and it makes file version backups of everything, and it keeps revision history. And then if it backs up something that's the same on multiple machines, it just makes one hard link for the file. So you only store the file once on the server. And it's got some really great compression. I've had it die on me once, but I've used it on and off over the years, and Backup PC is really great for a home backup.
So basically the same thing. So you're basically doing a complete backup every day, and then deduplicating at the whole file level any files that were unchanged between the days by using a hard link. So while that works, it doesn't really help if the file you copied is broken because you copied it in the middle of it being written to. So the first half of your backup is from before, and the second half of your backup is from after. The file is completely unusable now.
Dun, dun, dun.
Or, even if that doesn't happen, then you can end up with a situation where, you're copying a whole directory and an update happens in the middle of that. So the first 10 files are old and the other files are new. And if some of those files are paired together, then you're screwed.
Yes, exactly. Very well put, Allan.
But you would have that problem even with Bacula, unless you're doing a Bacula backup of a snapshot.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
Basically, you need file system snapshotting in order to do this safely.
True that, Allan. True that. All right, everybody, go snapshot your file system while we read the next email from John. He writes in, "Hi. In the latest episode of TechSNAP, you talked about the lack of detailed security announcements from Apple. I've always thought the same, but when you linked to the mailing list post about the vulnerability with QuickTime, I did a little digging and found out they actually use that mailing list for all of their products, including iOS, which you explicitly mentioned, complete with the CVE numbers and PGP signatures. So I guess you have some following up to do. And when looking at the mailing list archives, it looks like it isn't something that's new to them. The first message in the archive was from 2001, and those were also PGP signed. Thanks for making the show. I rarely use Apple products, but this time they actually got some plus points. I agree. Yeah.
Right. Well, he doesn't actually mention the level of detail, right? It's like, so they have the CVE numbers saying we fixed CVE 2012 1342, and here's our PGP signature. But did they actually explain what was wrong and how they fixed it?
Yeah, it's still hit and miss, in my opinion.
If you can't update and a bunch of things like that. And do they post this 6 months after that CVE or do they post it right away?
Yeah, okay, that's all. Those are all valid points. I mean, I
I haven't read the list, so I don't know. I'm not saying that they did it wrong or that they did it right. I'm just saying.
I just wanted to give Apple credit because
Yes.
what I have seen before is they have like a knowledge base site where they'll post an extremely abbreviated, like I'm saying, like vulnerabilities, a one sentence bullet point of security vulnerability fix, and I've always thought this is borderline irresponsible.
Microsoft has kind of the same thing unless you go into like TechNet, right?
Yeah, right. Well, so that's kind of how it's working for Apple, and I don't think they even link to that mailing list, or I've never really noticed it. But when you do dig in there, some stuff is like in very good detail, and some stuff is like stuff that was found by like I was looking at. There's some WebKit stuff in there that was found by the open source community that's in copious amounts of detail, and then I saw it's like it seems like different teams have different levels of information they put in there. But either way, it was a good point that John made because I gave them a hard time specifically on the show because it's always bugged me, but it just turns out it's just a little hidden.
They just hide it.
Yeah.
And yes.
So thanks, John. All right, so Daniel writes in. He says, another take on passwords when mobile, because this is a problem that continues to plague me. He says, on Android, I'm also using Firefox and its LastPass add-on, like we mentioned somebody was last week. And I also have the LastPass add-on installed for apps. Oh, I didn't even know there was a thing for apps. I wonder what that does. It's not very convenient, but when I need to get to a password, I copy and paste it from the LastPass app. See, that's what I'm doing too right now. The security is very questionable in my case, though, because my YubiKey does, of course, not work, and I've set both the add-on and the app to auto-login because of the hassle of manually typing passwords on a touch keyboard. Luckily, it's possible to revoke access from the device on LastPass settings page if somebody were to steal my tablet, but obviously it's not an ideal solution.
Right.
I worry actually kind of about this on the desktop, too. LastPass and all of KeyPass, aren't they all using the clipboard as a go-between between, like, say, your web browser and the database? And why couldn't malware just monitor the clipboard? I mean, anything can read the clipboard.
Yep.
And same on mobile, at least on Android,
well,
right?
it's the same reason why the GPG plugin for Firefox that let you encrypt your email in Gmail was kind of deprecated. In addition to the developer not wanting to work on it anymore, it's like, yeah, people can steal the plain text fairly easily.
Well, and in the case of mobile and the clipboard, I copy and paste very rarely. So a lot of times, my password will sit in my clipboard, no exaggeration, 2-3 days.
The one time I made a virtual machine of FreeBSD for the Linux Action Show, and there was some stuff left on the clipboard, which I didn't realize was saved as part of the VirtualBox file.
Yeah.
And so people were like pasting this, I forget what it wasn't anything overly sensitive, but it was a big long string of something that happened to be on my clipboard in Windows, and VirtualBox had copied it.
Oh,
right?
wow.
So I could paste it into the virtual machine.
Yeah.
And it was on the clipboard in the image. So that image I gave to all the Linux Action Show viewers now had the copy of my clipboard, which if it had been something else would have been bad.
Yeah, no kidding, right? I mean,
Yep.
So I worry about all of these things. So that's something I always keep in mind. But it seems like a lot of people, I mean, well, at least we've heard from a couple, and usually that's representative of a large group, that is using LastPass on mobile. So I gotta work out a process for that.
Yep.
So I like hearing people's takes. All right, one more. This one comes in from Eric. He wanted to share a real-life bad security experience. He says, hey, guys, love the show. Never miss an episode. I just experienced a computer security mishap that I thought I would share. This summer, I will be doing a summer course, and it will have some online lectures as part of it. The lectures are behind a login page. Now, here's the scary part. Everyone got an email detailing some logistics for the course, including how to log into the lecture site. In the email, they give you a password. Everyone gets the same password. Not only that, they attach an Excel file with all the course participants' individual user IDs, meaning I and everyone else taking the course have full access to each other's accounts until you log in and change the password, which nobody's going to do until June the 10th because they can't. I just thought I would share my first real-life experience with a really, really bad computer security. Keep up the great work. Best regards, Eric. Okay.
Funny story.
Yeah. I was going to say, we both worked in education.
When I was in college, when I was a student, we had a similar thing with our teacher had set up a NetBSD box that we could VPN into and gave everybody a default password.
Right.
So I immediately logged in and changed my password. And then I subsequent to that, immediately log in as the guy in the class I didn't like, changed his shell to, or no, was it his shell or just his like .login file to cat/dev/u random. So later on, when he logs into his shell, instead of getting a shell prompt, he gets flooded with random characters forever.
Nice.
Yes.
That's pretty good.
Ha, Kevin, you bastard.
So the problem...
/dev/random would run out of entropy and would stop, right? It would print like a kilobyte and then it would hang while it would block while it was waiting for more randomness. So you want random because it's pseudo-random. But anyway.
I've worked at a school district, and there's been a lot of times where, because we're scripting the account creation or we're doing it manually, where we've used like students as the password for everyone. At
the college, when I set up the thing for the main Unix server, we used people's birthdays because it was different for each person, but it was information the school had in their Excel file that they would give me.
One of the things we moved to eventually so we could script it is we would pull from the database what their student ID, we would actually do we grab the database, drop everything but the student ID, and then use that to set up their password. Then it would just be their student ID.
So basically, I would get an Excel file that was student ID, first name, last name, and birthday.
Okay.
And the username would be the student ID. And then the GCOS field would be the real name, and then the password would be the birth date.
Well, what was worse is when I got there, every student was logging in as student.
So nobody had separate accounts at all.
Every computer in the school. Everywhere. Yep. It was disastrous. And I guess, so then students would set wallpapers to like horribly inappropriate things, even though there'd be group policy to prevent that. And then the next student would log in and they'd get goat's aid or something like that.
Yeah. The other one was, as a college where I was, each machine had its own username, which was like basically the host name.
Yeah.
And then the password was always Mohawk1, the name of the school with a 1 after it. Right. The M was capitalized and there was a 1 at the end, so it would meet the Windows password complexity rules. They later transitioned once they had moved everything over, so they actually had an Active Directory or whatever, so that you would log in with like your student name and password. But
what good, sir. What good. It's good times.
But those machines were all deep frozen, so every time you reboot it, it was back to the stock image.
Yeah.
So there was less worry about people seeing anything.
Yeah, you just reboot it, and that does kind of just solve the problem. Yeah. All right. Well, you've got a ton of links in here for the BSDCan 2013 videos, including
not all the videos are online yet, but this account is where they're being uploaded. So they've got, I don't know, there's like 20 or more. I think I forget how many they are in total, but
does it say? No. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot.
Yeah. Well, there's also other conferences in there when you keep going. Like there's the PGCon and other conferences, but. Anyway, some of the videos are not there yet. And also Brad Davis's about FreeBSD lifecycle, basically managing a FreeBSD server from when you buy it to when you decommission it. The audio is missing on that one.
Oh. And the hypervisor talk isn't up yet either.
Yes, and the hypervisor talk isn't up yet. For Brad Davis's talk, I have my recording of the live stream, but the audio is literally just a webcam microphone, so it's not great. But when he's talking, everybody else is pretty quiet, so it's not too bad. Yeah. But we're going to sort something out with that. Anyway, so I have a link that shows all the videos that have been posted so far. I've also included a link specifically to mine because people keep asking me about it repeatedly.
Aww. They want to see Allan's video.
And then I linked to a couple of the other ones. Some of these aren't ones I actually got to see, so I have to watch them still. But Paul Shopstock did one case study of switching from Linux to FreeBSD, which is basically how he convinced his boss that it would be a good idea to switch to FreeBSD. I haven't actually seen that one. I was one I wanted to see, but it was at the same time as something else that I was doing. So Peter Hanstein did one called the Hail Mary Cloud. It's basically this low-intensity botnet. So it was SSH brute forcing, except for instead of the typical approach with the Chinese bots of like hitting you as fast as they can, they would hit you less than once an hour so that it wouldn't get blocked.
Yeah, there you go.
So it was, the attempts were spread out enough, it wouldn't actually trigger an attack or like the detection of an attack.
Right.
Or it would be to the point where it would look like legitimate failed passwords. Or, if you tried to ban someone for doing a couple of failures over the course of a week, you would start hitting real users. Because I don't know about you, but I fat finger my password every once in a while.
Oh yeah, totally.
So I can't just ban everybody on the first time they fail the password.
No.
And so basically they lowered the intensity to the point where it's hard to separate it from legitimate failed passwords. And so that was an interesting talk. And he's got...
How they've worked that out.
Well, he was trying to write PF rules to block it. And so he's got the lessons he learned while trying to do that.
I bet he just kept hitting different scenarios. Well, now this is going to be a problem. Well, now this is going to be a problem. I can imagine how that went.
Yeah. And then Powell, PJD, who's the guy that ported ZFS to FreeBSD, he gave a talk that kind of details the structure of his security appliance that he's building called the Voodoo. And basically, it uses FreeBSD, Capsicum, which is application level sandboxing, Geli, which is the FreeBSD disk encryption, and ZFS as the key components of a security appliance. And he basically talks about his appliance, and it's quite interesting.
That is interesting. I like that, Allan. All right. So, and as maybe like the Beehive ones get posted and stuff like that, I'm sure you'll link to it in the show notes, right?
Yep, and there's a couple more videos.
Okay.
Kirk McCusick's talk about an overview of security in the FreeBSD kernel. This came up a week or two ago. People were asking about jails and how the security actually works. And he covers that and a bunch of other things in this talk. Right, so his actually covers FreeBSD secure levels, what those are and how they work. Jails, including the vImage stuff where you can virtualize the networking instead of having it share this main network stack. In the case where you want to have a different default route for the jail or a different routing table for the jail than you would for the physical machine. Capsicum, only an overview because that was actually a separate talk entirely by someone else. And basically all the different security features that are in the kernel, including just the flags, like the fact that you can make a file so it's append only.
This stuff is great because it's basically free educational training. You can go watch this. You get the latest free from the experts that are working on it. It's like taking a class right on YouTube.
The conference is great too because you get to ask the people questions.
Yes. Yeah, you can't beat that.
Also, just hang out with them, right? Because it's Kirk McCusick, for Christ's sakes.
That's true. You can't beat that.
Yeah. And then the last one I added kind of at the last minute here was Sean Webb gave a talk on runtime process infection, which is literally his talk on how you infect a running process. So that basically the Hetzner story brought this up. It's right. It seems from the way Hetzner described it, it seemed like they were infecting SSHD and Apache without changing the binary on the disk and without restarting them.
Right.
So it may actually be an instance of this runtime process infection or something else.
Huh. That might be how they're pulling it off, huh? Very nice, Allan. Well, kind of makes me wish I could go. I'm going to Vlogger Fair this Saturday. I'll be in Seattle if anybody's going to be in the area and you want to go to Vlogger Fair. I don't think that's as exciting as BSDCan 2013, though. At least probably not as educational. It might be more exciting. All right. Well, anything else?
BSDCan was pretty exciting for me.
Right. I bet, especially when you're doing all the streaming stuff. That can be quite exciting.
Yeah, that was running around like a chicken with my head cut off.
All right. Anything else you want to cover in the feedback?
Nope. The Beehive video hopefully will be up soon because that's really good too.
Yeah, I bet. All right, well, you can always email the show, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or we've got the contact link. You click that, then you choose TechSNAP from the drop-down, and then fill out your message, and it comes into our inbox. Or even better, start a thread in our subreddit over at subreddit links.techsnap.tv. I can say it. It's just a lot of words that go together, but I can get it. But with the feedback all done, you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the roundup for stories, it didn't quite fit at the top of the show. We still want to talk about them just a little bit and give you some links to read up on your own after the show, at your leisure. Yep. And a lot of these links are supplied by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Allan, I think we begin with Lenovo this week.
Yep.
So where do we start?
It's your story.
Oh, it is? Oh, so
yes.
Okay, I'm gonna lie. Only a couple of the links I added this week because Allan, you were like link crazy.
You added one, but anyway.
But it's a good one.
Lenovo opened a factory in North Carolina where they're actually going to produce like computers and tablets.
Awesome.
Although it's mostly automated, so it's only like 115 new manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
But it's it's also going to be their center for returns and a bunch of other stuff. And, it's better than having it in China, I suppose.
That's very true, and that's Apple's doing that too. They're going to do a very automated data center. So it seems to be the way of the future.
Well, I don't know about data center, but this is a factory for making.
I meant factory. I was looking at pictures of data centers.
Yes.
All right.
Distracted. Chris is distracted.
The chat room's giving me lots of pictures today. More than 360,000 Apache websites have been taken down by a critical plus vulnerability.
No.
I don't know why.
That's not what it says at all.
No, it's not at all. But I don't.
It's my story. I don't know why you're doing it. Anyway, there's a 0-day exploit for Plesk, which is a web server administration program. Basically, a web interface that lets you configure a web server, especially if you're not a great Linux administrator. But there's a 0-day exploit for it that allows an attacker to run arbitrary code. Basically, it exposes the entirety of user bin to being executed remotely. There are 360,000 Linux servers running Plesk, and that's just the results from Shodan, right? So there probably are more than 360,000 Linux servers. It's unknown at this time if this exploit can be used against Windows.
Okay.
Because Windows paths are different and stuff, but it may be possible that this same vulnerability exists on Windows somewhere.
This article threw me out because they just have a picture of an ambulance on there. It's like, what the hell is Allan Lincoln on?
That was my first question when I opened that thing was, is there some specific ambulance that's affected by this or something? I don't know. So
in yesterday's Unfilter, we covered a little more of the Chinese hacking stuff that's going on. And, Obama's meeting with the president of China tomorrow, and one of their top agendas is cybersecurity. And China came out this week, sort of ahead of that meeting, and said that A, they think it's irresponsible what the U.S. has been saying about Chinese hacking, and that B, they have a mountain of data that shows the U.S. has been hacking them.
Well, yeah, basically China says when we get a hacking attempt and it comes from the U.S., we don't assume it was the U.S. government, right? It could have been someone else.
Right. They say
we would appreciate if the U.S. extended the same courtesy to us.
Yeah.
But the real quote that I extracted from this was when China was talking about when the U.S. kept complaining about the weapon schematics or whatever that got stolen, right? Mm-hmm. All the plans for their weapon system.
Right.
And the Chinese quote for that one is, even following the general principles of secret keeping, it should not have been linked to the internet.
Right.
Right? Why were those weapon plans on the internet for someone to be able to steal in the first place?
That's what we've been saying.
We don't need new cybersecurity laws. We need people not to put shit they don't want other people to have on the internet.
Yeah. There was an interview on CNN where it was implied that it was a Defense Department contractor that was
most likely
compromised. Yeah.
But,
China's right. This Chinese representative. I thought this was kind of like a, I don't know, it's an interesting dynamic that they're kind of reaching. They say we have mountains of data. If we wanted to accuse the U.S., we could, but it's not helpful in solving the problem. I don't know. Of course, this is what they're going to say.
They're both attacking each other, and that's to be expected, I suppose.
Yeah, they're both building. There was a story that came out this week about the Pentagon is doing more hiring for a cyber offensive force, not defensive force. They're going to have dedicated teams of offensive forces. So both sides, right? And we know that China is doing it through the schools. They have school programs to sort of take people into channels that lead them into sort of the cybersecurity division of the military.
Yep.
All right. So here's an article from Computer World that you linked, Allan, that says today's digital data could be gone tomorrow.
Yes. So Vint Cerf, who's one of the two guys that invented TCP/IP, which is fundamental to almost everything we do.
I use that sometimes.
Yeah. Basically, he's also works as like the chief internet evangelist at Google. But his worry is that a lot of files and stuff that we create won't be accessible in the future because we'll just drop backwards compatibility at some point because it's hard and annoying and exposes vulnerabilities and all that. But to kind of prove this all came up because he was trying to access like an Excel document from an older version of Excel, and it's not openable in a newer version now.
Well, is he just discovering the downsides of proprietary closed formats that are controlled by a single company?
Well, even if it was an open source format,
it still has to be read by something. If the application
hasn't been maintained in 10 years,
right,
then it's not necessarily really usable.
But you take, like, for example, ODF. You got to figure, worst case scenario, that's going to outlast any proprietary format because it's people can take that code and continue to write it in any application.
If we switch to some newer spec at some point, who's going to bother to maintain the backwards compatibility for ODF?
I worry about this a lot when it comes to like home movies and stuff like that. So, if I capture Dylan's first birthday using my camera that records to an MP4 file, in 30 years, when I want to remember those amazing moments of my life, am I going to be able to play back an MP4 file? I don't know.
Or every 5 or 10 years, are you going to have to reconvert it?
Probably. And will it lose quality every time I have to move it to a different format because it's encoded and it's lossy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hate that we're kind of in this phase right now. And I think humans don't really do very well at thinking about this stuff in a large scale. It's kind of we're kind of monkeys about that stuff. Mm-hmm. Speaking of things that make me feel like a crazy monkey, shock and horror, everyone. It's been discovered, thanks to a whistleblower, that the NSA is collecting the phone records of millions of Verizon customers. The National Security Agency is currently collecting the telephone records of millions of U.S. customers of Verizon, one of America's largest telecom providers, under a top-secret court order issued in April. So this is a little different than the NSA whistleblowing. This is actually a legalized version of monitoring that was issued in April. The document shows for the first time under the Obama administration that communication records of these citizens are being collected indiscriminately in bulk, regardless of whether if they are suspected of wrongdoing. This started on April 25th. It lasts for 3 months. It ends on July 19th. Numbers of both parties on a call are handed over, as is location data for the customer, the call duration, unique identifiers, and the time and duration of the calls. However, the contents of the conversation themselves are not covered.
By this legal wiretapping doesn't mean that it's not being
by an NSA data center, right?
Right. The NSA may have the call; it just needs this metadata in order to categorize who's calling who here.
Well, so this is what they can do: is they can legally have this data, and then they can go, and then they can say, well, we now have proof that there's a national security incident. Yeah.
Data.
Well, they can say, look, we can show he called this person, so we have a national security precedent here. It's not known whether Verizon is the only cell phone provider to be targeted with such an order. I would doubt it, although previous reporting has suggested that the NSA has collected call records from all major mobile networks. It is unclear whether, from leaked documents, this 3-month order was a one-off or the latest in a series of similar orders. And there's a lot of current national security things that are sort of renewed constantly right now since 9/11. Chilling. Not unexpected at all. I think it's actually been malpractice of the mainstream media that this hasn't been reported on more. This has been going on for a long time. The only reason why we're actually getting coverage about this is A, there was a whistleblower making us think about it, and B, it's something new that was issued in April that's actually being done through an actual legal framework, so we can talk about it. What the hell? What the hell kind of, it's getting to the point now where you're gonna just kind of have to assume that you're always under surveillance. And that could be no problem for you at all. But
well,
you
if you're a paranoid person, you already assume that.
I think so, right? I think so. I think you do. Yeah. Anyways, that was one of the top stories in our subreddit, and it's obviously a story we'll keep following on this show and on Filter. Now, here's a story from the SecList mailing list over at seclist.org. This one comes from, who is it? Travis.
Yeah, so we talked about this, I think, last week. It was Travis Ormandy, and he found that bug in the Windows kernel and disclosed it.
Right.
Now he's published a working version of an exploit for
it. Remember how we're like, well, it's not so bad because there's not actual working code yet. Remember how we said that?
Well, we didn't say that. It was just
I kind of did.
But, we mostly talked about how Google's policy was when there's working code, you only give people 7 days anyway.
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah, I recall. Yeah. So there we go.
But yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there's working exploit code to get root on a Windows box.
Lock down your Bluetooth device and secure your Acura because police admit they're stumped by mystery car thieves.
Yes. So basically, car thieves seem to have some little device that can trigger the remote unlocking on a number of different makes and models of car. So there's some video here, people just walking up to a car, pressing the button on their little device and unlocking the car and then stealing the contents.
And it's using
cash, money. People leave, valuables, cell phones, stuff in their car, and they're just stealing them.
Is it using Bluetooth?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Because I think one of the makes and models that is affected is my make and model of car. So
I know there was Acura was mentioned specifically, and a couple others.
And that's what Ange has, an SUV. She has an older one, so I'm not sure if it's actually affected or not because it's not super new.
But mostly, to me, it raises the question of, there's always this secrecy of what the security on those little tokens actually is.
Right. How does it work?
Yeah. And, they've always been very vague about it, and it's probably because it's not that great.
I'm not an Eve player, but I've been gathering there's been some bad news for the Eve community, including some denial of services, and now it looks like some downtime too, right?
Well, yeah. So there was a denial of service attack, and as part of that, Eve decided that the best mitigation was basically to withdraw their BGP routes and pull their stuff off the internet.
Oh, wow.
Until the attackers gave up, kind of thing. But it turns out the denial of service attack was actually an attempt to mask an exploit. So someone had actually managed to exploit a vulnerability in one of their back-end servers and compromise one of the machines.
I didn't want them to notice, so they made them.
And so, so they kind of covered their tracks or tried to distract them with this denial of service attack instead.
That's pretty clever, actually.
Yeah, and because of that, the CCP, which is the company, pulled their entire Tranquility cluster, which is Eve and their other game Dust, offline, and their web servers.
Wow. That's kind of like a take my ball and go home kind of approach, but I guess what else can they do?
Well, no, they had to shut it down and then, bring it back up after they inspect everything, right?
Yeah.
They like to stress that at no time was customer data compromised or accessible to the attacker in any way.
Okay.
So originally this story caught my attention because they were like, there was a denial of service attack, but your customer data was not compromised. I'm like, those two things don't go together. A denial of service attack doesn't compromise your data. I was like,
right.
Are they just saying that because people don't know the difference?
Trying to make people feel good and safe? What?
Or something. And then when I read into it, it's actually, no, there was actually an associated website that had a backdoor in it.
Yeah. Huh. Well, the Eve community will always rebound, I have found, Allan. They will make it through it. I'm actually surprised MMOs don't suffer this more. It seems like they would be a much easier target. Like websites, there are more and more solutions coming up now to protect yourself from a denial of service attack for a website.
Whereas MMOs are all usually a one-off protocol, right?
Right, and some custom-built server solution, and who knows what kind of load balancing setup they have. It seems like they'd be going down all the time.
But yeah, it seems it was actually a vulnerability in some other back-end service, like probably a standard Linux type service.
Oh.
Windows, right? They compromised the machine not through the game, but through some other back-end service.
Right.
Like a mail server or something.
Yeah. And then
but apparently that back-end service supports the operation of the Tranquility cluster, so they're very vague about it. So It kind of reminds me of, I don't want to make a strong correlation here, but the Sony attack was because they were running very, very old version of like OpenSSH or whatever.
Apache, I think it was. Wasn't it an old Apache?
They were running really old Apache, really old SSH, basically really old everything without any patches.
Right. We actually talked about at the time how a lot of times as companies grow, a lot of times the infrastructure will age and age because they become more and more risk averse, and they don't want to do the patches. They don't want the downtime. Downtime equals money, and so these things just stretch out. And even when it's a company, like Eve Online, who is probably extremely technically adept, it can still happen. And it's sort of this constant battle between the realities of the business and the realities of this and the needs of the system administrator.
Yep.
Thus, our show takes place somewhere in between that struggle, Allan. Well, I do believe that brings us to the end of this week's show. We have links to everything we covered in the show notes. If you guys want to read those roundup stories in further detail, just go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, look for episode 113, and then scroll down past the download links, and you'll find show notes to everything we covered. And don't forget you can join us live on Thursdays over at jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Very nice. And also over at jblive.info, where we have the audio stream for you commuters and you desk jockeys. Allan, thanks for the great show, man. That's where you say goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. All right, Allan. See you. Bye, Allan. I miss you, Allan. Goodbye. See you goodbye to Allan's box. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.